Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Okay, so I'm going to backtrack again and tell a couple of travel stories from my childhood and then some stuff to Hawaii from Hawaii that I didn't quite get to. Okay, so let's start with my trip to Jamaica when I was about 6. I went with my mother and stepfather and we went to Kingston, Jamaica. Now, in those days, I did not like having my hair washed or washing it myself. I just didn't like soap got in my eyes, whatever. I didn't like it. And so, being still borderline hippies, they didn't make me. Um, and that will be relevant. Okay, so we get to Jamaica and to Kingston, and it's really hostile. I don't really remember much about that. I don't remember all that much about the trip in general, but I was told that people were waving machetes at them and, trying to assault them and so forth. Uh, my mom says it's like the most unfriendly, hostile place she has ever been, and she was a seasoned world traveler. So that's probably very likely true. And she said we did see some Rastafarians with big dreadlocks. I don't remember that either. And finally, we went to a resort in Montego called Montego Bay, which was much nicer. Okay. However, at one point, I believe we were still in Kingston, and I got up one night. I woke up and I was in bed alone, and I started tugging at my hair, and it started coming out in handfuls. So rather than be scared or worried, I used my 6-year-old logic and deduced that this must be just like when I lose my baby teeth, I get money from the tooth fairy if I put it under my pillow. And so therefore I figured that the hair fairy would give me money if I put my handfuls of hair under the pillow. So that's what I did. And woke up the next day. My parents noticed that I had big patches of hair missing. And I explained and showed them all the hair under the pillow. And they were like, yeah, no, that's not normal. Like your baby teeth falling out is normal, natural. This is not. They took me to a doctor and he said, well, he has ringworm, which is odd because usually the only people who have ringworm are really poor people who aren't able to wash their hair much. And you can bet that after that, I had to wash my hair or let someone else wash it for me. Yeah, the days of unwashed hair were gone. All right. About 11, my family took a trip to an Apache reservation in Arizona. And I learned a couple things like how they carry their babies in these like packs on their back. And the babies kind of get flat heads because of resting on the back, on the board, on the backpack. And so I went back to 6th grade and my class in junior high school. And I told this bit about the babies, and somebody said, but that's not interesting. We don't want to hear about that. It's boring. So, oh, well, you know. Anyway, now back to Hawaii. Ages 12 and 13. And so my parents used to smoke marijuana with me. And I remember I posted this somewhere online and I said, my parents suggested I try marijuana when I was 12, and then they smoked it with me. And somebody said, See, that's what happens when parents try to be a child's friend instead of his parents. But that's not really what the situation was, because the thing is, my parents would have friends over and they'd pass the doobie around. By the standards of 70s weed, Hawaiian Pakalolo was fairly strong. And then not too long after that, they would say, maybe I'd say something or try to get engage with the discussion in some way. And they'd say, all right, this would be a good time for you to go to your room. So I would go to my room alone and stoned, and really it wasn't all that much fun. And I, for a long time up until recently, and to a certain extent still, after I stopped, using unprescribed drugs, the just the smell of marijuana would just give me this creepy feeling, and I think it has to do with that, with all that. Now, I'll admit that sometimes to sleep, I take CBD extract with just a teensy bit of THC. I really still, when I accidentally get too much and get a proper THC high, I don't enjoy it. I actually believe I have developed cannabis dysphoria, which is a real thing. My father had it too. Okay, so one evening we went to a big party. I forget what the occasion was, but it was a real big party with my family's circle of friends as well as some other people we didn't know. So starting off, I smoked some Pakalolo, and then I got dry mouth, so I drank some wine, and then I round up in this room full of people, and they had a bottle of tequila and a bottle of Mexican beer for a chaser. So Mexican style drinking, we take a hit off of the tequila and then off of the beer. So I did that for a while. Now, my friends is I wound up with oh yeah, at one point they had something, they were eating these little scraps of paper, and I said, "Oh, what's that? Can I have some?" And the woman was like, "No, you might love it, but no." And of course, that was LSD, and I'm glad she didn't give me any. So I got to wait a couple of years to have that experience. Uh, Anyways, I wound up with Irene's sister and niece. The niece was 12, my age. We were casual friends. My mom kind of wanted us to be dating, and she even referred to her once on the phone as my girlfriend, but she was never my girlfriend, and I never uh, really thought of her that way or wanted to. But we were friends. Uh, so anyway, I end up with this woman and her daughter, and unknown to me, this woman was tripping on LSD at the time. And so that makes it actually fairly impressive how she managed to hold the situation together. And the situation was that I started throwing up. So she smartly told me to go into the bathtub. And that was a good move because I just kept doing it and doing it and doing it. And finally I was done. I guess I was washed up or washed myself or something and got out of the bathtub. And when I told them what had led to that, she said, "Well, if it makes you feel any better, the rest of them are probably in the same condition as you are." And then the daughter said something. I don't remember exactly what, but I said, you know, the more grown up you try to be, the more immature you wind up seeming. And her mom looked at me and said, have you ever considered becoming a guidance counselor? And of course, it was hilarious because I was giving this advice after just like hurling my guts out. But then she said, but basically, what he said is right on. And I guess that was the first time that I, drank myself into vomiting. Later, I did it a lot, and in retrospect, I called myself an alcoholic bulimic, meaning I would drink till I threw up and then drink till I threw up again. I actually kind of enjoyed that part of it, came to enjoy that part of it, yeah, which is kind of disgusting, but there you have it. Okay, now's a fun little part called endangering my brother, which I didn't do intentionally, but I did endanger my brother. And the reason is, so when we were in Kaneohe, we lived right across the street from the beach, and it was a muddy beach. And my mom would give, I'd get the responsibility of babysitting my 5-year-old brother when I was 12. And I don't quite think I was up to the task, especially under those conditions. So we would play along the beach, and one time the tide went way, way out. So we just locked along, doodly doodly doo. And then suddenly the tide started coming back. And I would like, hurry, run back. And we were running my brother. The water was up to his chest. And for some reason, it never occurred to me to like try to pick him up and run with him. But fortunately, we got that out of that alive, especially him. He was in the most danger. And when I told that story to my mom, she said, stupid tourists drown every year because they don't know about things like tides and waves. And I'm thinking, oh, now you tell me, maybe that advice would have been useful before. Another time we were walking further down the beach, and there was this, I don't know, someone had made something, and there was a hose stretching from one like tree branch to another. And I told my brother, okay, what you got to do now is grab the hose with your hands and go across like that. And he said, but then I'm going to fall. And in that case, he was smarter than I was, because very likely he would have fallen and gotten hurt. So those were a couple of funny in retrospect, but not so much at the time, situations where I accidentally endangered my brother. So what happened also? So I mentioned that I had a crush on these two girls my age, and one was a Hawaiian, and one was the Howley. And the Howley one, blonde, blue-eyed, white, seems to play in a bit more to the upcoming stories. I did not know how to approach girls. Still, I had this big gap between what I wanted and what I knew how to do, or perhaps what was even possible for me to do at that age. So I just wrote her a note. We were in school. I just wrote her a note, basically just saying, hey, I want to have sex with you. And I handed it to her, and she was with a group of girls, and they were like, ew, gross. And okay, that approach didn't really work. Somehow, however, I got her phone number, and I called, and I was so nervous. And I got some guy, I guess it was probably a brother, and I was breathing like a heavy breather, like, like I was making whoopee on the other end, but I wasn't. I was just so nervous, and I was going, is Teresa there? And her brother, or whoever it was, just imitated me, said what I said, and did heavy breathing like I did. He must have just thought it was, a regular old breather instead of an unintentional breather. And so I just hung up. Fortunately, I don't think anybody ever knew that it was me who made that call, because there was no caller ID back then, thank God. So my mom, they would hire teenage babysitters, which sometimes worked out okay and sometimes not so much. They had done that in Marin too. They hired this girl who was 16, and she had some issues. So, first of all, she had a boyfriend that seemed like a nice enough guy, but actually, he was, it turned out he was a notorious con man. And guys from various families of girls that he had somehow exploited were after him. And so they wound up breaking up. And then I remember somehow the same girl, Teresa, wound up in my yard, but it wasn't because I had asked her. She was friends with this other girl, the babysitter. No, it's a small town, so not so surprising. Anyway, this babysitter, she said, yeah, last night I was asleep and I realized that somebody was trying to get into bed with me, and I figured it was probably one of my brothers. And if it had been, this brother, I would have, let him get into bed with me. But it was Robert. So Robert was the fat brother that she didn't find attractive. And she was like, just laughing. She said, his big belly, ha, ha, ha. And I, and maybe it took me a while to process the fact that if it had been the other brother, she would have been okay with it, which was a little odd. So the next thing that happened was one of my mom's favorite dresses went missing, and she actually missed a party because she had been wanting to wear that dress and it was gone. And then this girl showed up to work there at my folks' place wearing that same dress. So clearly she had stolen it, and they asked for it back. I don't know if they gave her something else to get home in, and of course fired her. And my mom said, yeah, when you steal a dress and then wear it back to work where you stole it from, that clearly means you don't want the job. So on another occasion, I was hanging out with my parents and some friends of theirs, and once again smoked a little weed with them. And the friends had two daughters that were identical twins. These blonde, blue-eyed, 12, same age as me, identical, not fraternal, but completely identical twins. And after a bit, one of them walked up to me and she whispered, my sister likes you and I love you. And I just didn't know at that time what to do with that information. And there must have been at least some truth to it, because later they collectively bought me some cologne and passed it along to me. Yeah. And there were also a couple of girls the same age, fraternal twins that lived next door to me, and I hung out, with them and such, but there was never any kind of mutual attraction manifested. Um, yes, and the place in Hawaii had the yard in Kaneohe had a banana tree and a chili pepper tree and a pakalolo plant. I tried to take a leaf off the plant and put some raisins in it and make wine, but I failed to do that. Uh, it didn't come out to be anything. I do remember once noting that the banana tree had broken over from the weight of the bananas. And I said to my mom, I wonder how they managed to survive when the weight of their own fruit broke it over. And she said, I don't care about that. And, sometimes she would just say these cutting things that would, like, I kind of feel like every time I was trying to like rebond with her, she'd say something like that. And I'd be like, oops, better keep my distance, emotionally speaking. And the pepper plant proved relevant because my poor little brother, I remember, he just grabbed a red pepper, a chili pepper off and started tearing it apart. And then he went and took a pee. And then a short while after that, he started saying, my penis hurts, my penis hurts. And at first, I thought he was faking it because that's kind of the attitude I picked up from my folks. But then I took him, and obviously he had gotten pepper juice into his unit. Poor little guy. Life was so rough. So, yeah, and that's pretty much that whole episode. And now I guess we can move on to where I said we were going to move on to last time, which was my trip with my father to Japan. So he went to I wish I remember the name of the town. It was basically Tenrikyo Central headquarters, like Tenrikyo Vatican City, sort of. So we went there. I remember seeing snow coming out of the sky for the first time in my life. I had seen snow before when my folks had took me on road trips up to the Sierra Mountains in the winter. But this was the first time that I'd actually seen it fall. And my father thought that was pretty cool because, of course, he had grown up in New York and seen, snowfall for as early as he could remember, probably. I ate barbecued squid. And we got some traditional clothing that was supposed to belong to the foundress, some scraps, some pieces of garments that had supposed to have belonged to the foundress of Tenrikyo, but that wasn't actually true. They basically they would sort of change her clothing regularly. I don't know exactly how. They have these Shinto-ish customs and these Shinto-ish looking altars. They would change the clothing, and then when they got done with that set of clothing, they would cut it up and give it to people. And I think I still have it. So yeah, that was fun. But then we went to the California town of Richmond, California, where he had rented a room with a middle-aged blind man. The town was like this working class town. It was largely black, but not entirely. I was going to junior high there. And to me, it was just like dreary, like the guy, the master tenant there was blind, so there was nothing on the walls. There were just these dreary white walls and this dreary, boring town. So I got out of it, as much as I could. I mean, I did go to, there were some cool things. I went to Berkeley, which at that time was kind of jumping. Remember these, there were these three evangelical preachers yelling at each other and insulting each other. One was a famous one named Holy Hubert. And he was saying something, and this other guy said, "The Bible forbids fornicating, and this man's wife was already married when he met her. And what do you call that? Fornicating." And Holy Hubert said, "You're a liar. My wife was a widow lady." And then one of them left, and the other one, I guess, was dressed in white, and this other preacher showed up and was like, "Some people dress in black and some people dress in white, but your spirituality is not dependent on how you dress." And I just found that a blast, highly entertaining. I was talking to somebody, maybe they were Moonies, I'm not sure. And some guy came up and said, "I'm from another planet, and I went to the science department on this university, and I told them that I could prove that I have all the physiology of a person from another planet if they would only examine me. But they said they didn't have any time for me." Jeez, wonder why. And then I was at a restaurant, some guy just alone just started playing the guitar. That was fun. But I did get myself into some sketchy situations. I was in the BART had been built, and I was wandering around taking the BART or hitchhiking, just whatever. And I met this guy who apparently was a Hell's Angel. So he said, and he had Hell's Angels tattooed to his arm, chest, something, as well as a swastika tattooed to his earlobe. And my father said, "Well, I hope he really was one, because if he wasn't, they might remove that tattoo from him," which was true. But he said, "Hey, I've got a little thing going, selling LSD. And if you want to get in on it, I'll give you some and see how your hustle is and see how, what money you can bring back and so forth." And he gave me a couple of hits, and he was like, and this one is a 4-way, so be careful with this one. So I went to the local park, and, I was like going psychedelics. And there was this bunch of Navy guys drunk, and one of them said, "No, thanks, we're already tripping." Probably they were just drunk. And then I guess I said it to this girl younger than me that I thought was older, and people were like, no, stop it. So then I went home. I could not find the guy's house. So I was scared that he might somehow find me, but nevertheless, I couldn't find him. So I took the BART home with all this leftover LSD. And then when I was alone, I think I took the 4-way and half of the 1-way of one of the 1-ways. And I also gave or sold one of the one-way, the others to some friends of mine in San Francisco. And I got the slightest amount high, which may have entirely been placebo effect, but I'm really glad it wasn't what he said it was, because wow, 5 hits of acid when I was 13 and hadn't ever done acid before would not have been good, especially in that depressing surrounding. So I told you I had met the Children of God in Hawaii. And so I met them then. I was with my father in a mall in Richmond. Like, Richmond was one of those places where there was no there. There was really no center. There wasn't much to see. The mall was basically the cultural center, as it is in a lot of suburbs, but this one, it seemed like even more. There just wasn't much there. And I met this guy from the Children of God, and I was like, oh, hey, I was excited, something interesting, and he was what they called litnessing, which means witnessing, which means sharing the gospel, except with literature, and thus they called it litnessing. They coined a lot of their own terminology. And then they would ask for money, of course, after they gave someone a pamphlet. Anyways, I found out where their headquarters were. It was in Oakland. I remember there were still Black Panthers selling their newspaper on the streets there. And I talked to them, and they asked me if I wanted to join. And I said, hold on, I need to go to the bathroom. Let me think about it. And so I went to the bathroom, but the real reason was I wanted to hear God's voice. Oh, I had forgot to mention that I started hearing God's voice when I was in Hawaii, and received the information that I was that I was a prophet. And then in Japan, I was really getting, this kind of downloading this kind of stuff. And I kept a book that I've later lost that I was writing down my revelations, and essentially, I was supposed to start my own religion at some point. And so when this guy asked me if I wanted to join the Children of God, I went to the bathroom and I prayed on it. I asked for God's will, and he said, yes, you should join, but not permanently. You should join so that you will better learn how to start your own ministry later. So I think part of this thing that saved me was that I went in with this sort of detachment, which of course I never told any of them about. And I sort of forgot that at points, but it was in the back of my mind, like, this is not my permanent home here. This is just a temporary learning experience. I told my father, he didn't like it, but he went and checked it out. And he said, yeah, all these beautiful women were telling me, Avram, telling me, did I just say a name? Anyway, that's what I'm calling him. Okay, that's what I'm calling him for the purpose of these videos. Said, I love you. And he said, I was tempted to join myself. And obviously he didn't. When I had first spoken about them in Hawaii, I remember my mother and stepfather giving me these long lectures about all the things Christians had done to Jews over the millennia, and that was why it was really not very acceptable to them that I become a Christian like Buddhist, pagan, whatever. That was okay. All that stuff was okay. Hare Krishna's also invited me to join, and one of them said, if you join now, then when you're an adult, other adults will be coming and still learning to use the toilet properly. I'm like, what do you mean? He said, well, we don't use toilet paper. We use our hand and a can of water. That sounds super sanitary, but I guess that's India style. And yeah. And they definitely stress the importance of sexual abstinence. And one of them, I was there at like 4 a.m. chanting Hare Krishna with one of the guys. And this woman just said hi to me. And I said hi, and then we went off, and then he said, you really shouldn't be talking to women, especially not at this hour when you should be, your mind is pure and you should be chanting. Prabhupada, that's the founder, said that women are 10 times as cunning as men and 10 times as lustful. And they have all these tricks that you'll learn about when you'll understand better when you get older, like trying to pretend to be shy and so forth. So anyways, I told my mom, they invited me to join, but I didn't because I want to still be free to investigate other religions. And she said, are you sure it doesn't have anything to do with that you still want to be free to, experiment with drugs and sex? And I mean, obviously that turned out to be true. So, okay, back to Richmond and Oakland. So I was hanging out a lot with them, and I really did have a lot of fun. Later, they turned into a very demented group, and the head rotted from the fish. Well, they say that the fish rots from the head down, which is ironic given the multiple meanings they had given to the phrase flirty fishing, but had given and would later give. So the fish rotted from Moses David down, but it sort of started, I gather, within these elite inner circles and then gradually went out from the rest of the group. So all the child abuse and the child sexual abuse, stuff that happened to the second generation mainly that were born into it. Some pretty awful stuff, actually. But I hadn't experienced any of that. That wasn't really happening yet where I was. And so I did have some fun. We would go on these road trips, hitchhiking trips, and it would either be me and another guy, or me and a woman and another guy. They said, we can't send you on these road trips with a woman alone because you're not big enough to protect her if necessary. So I remember we went with this one teenage black kid. There weren't actually that many black people in it. And I guess later they did a drive to recruit more so they could colonize Africa, was the idea. But then eventually I think he turned into a full-blown racist and anti-Semite. So I don't know how that all went. But anyways, we would hitchhike to these places, San Francisco or various towns. We would do these things like in malls or on the street where we handed out these pamphlets and asked for money, and then we'd get something to eat, and then we would basically find somebody who let us crash with them. And Usually that's what we did. Uh, so for me, it was, oh, but sometimes we didn't. We would bring sleeping bags and we would sleep in the woods, like behind the shopping mall. And I remember doing that once and just feeling so free, just feeling so free. And plus, I had a crush on the 19-year-old that I was with. So, uh, on another occasion, we took a longer road trip all the way to Tahoe. We hitchhiked to Tahoe. We found it to be cold physically and also kind of emotionally because people were just there to gamble and drink. And like we'd try to, I'd try to give them something and they'd like just walk through me and say, hey, get out of the way. And it was kind of like that. But we met up with a couple of other, one or two other, I guess it must have been at least two members of COG, which stood for Children of God. And then we went into the woods and we had communion. Having communion at that point meant going to the liquor store, getting a bottle of cheapish wine and some ordinary bread and having some bread and wine. I remember this young woman who I guess was also about 19 or something, maybe a bit younger, said, yeah, she must have been younger because she was still living with your parents, with her parents. So if you were like us and you were too young to legally leave your parents without their consent and didn't get their consent, which I definitely did not get, or you were in prison, or you were in the military, or you had what they called a system job, which most of them quit their system jobs. But in some cases, the guys were making so much money at their system jobs that they said, no, it's better that you stay in your system job and financially support the family. And any of those four categories would qualify you to become what they called a catacombs member. So the catacombs in ancient Rome had been underground caves where Christians had met to pray in secret. So I was a catacombs member, and I guess this young woman was too, or girl or whatever. And I remember she said, after a hard day of persecution, I sometimes like to get some bread and wine and have communion by herself. Not exactly traditional. And she said, and my mom would say, how can you call yourself a Christian when you're drinking wine? Now, how old was she that she could get wine? I'm not sure about that. Anyway, she said, my mom would say, how can you call yourself a Christian when you're sitting around drinking wine? And the other guy, oh yeah, there were four of us. One of the other guys said, moms don't understand, which was pretty ironic because they were teaching us young folks to rebel against our parents, which I definitely did, and to rebel against the society, which they called the system and the people in it systemites. But basically, anybody who wasn't them, most people were systemites. So, for example, I mentioned something about the Black Panthers, who actually were kind of in their waning days by that time. But he said, yeah, but now they're the Black Systemites. Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah, that makes sense. And I started preaching and attempting to win people and flirty fish at school. The majority of the students there were Black, and most of them really weren't that hostile to me. Um, and frankly, most of the hostility I was getting wherever I went, I played a large part in bringing onto myself by being weird in whatever way I could think of at the moment. And but a lot of them, of course, were churchgoers, were Baptists or whatever. And they would say, I go to church, I go to church. And I would say the Children of God line, which was, that's okay. God loves you anyway. They didn't think that other churches, other Christians, well, generally speaking, other Christians other than themselves were real Christians, and they were pretty aggressive about that and had been from the start, apparently, from what I read, or almost from the start. So I did not make friends, and I did not influence people very much. And I do remember on one occasion I was walking home, and this kid just started punching me on the side of my head, and I just ignored him. And then he said, "Hey, let's walk down this alley," and I'm like, I'm not that stupid. So I didn't. I was given a similar invitation later, and also declined. I didn't decline, but just didn't do it later in life. So where was I? Tahoe, the Nevada side. And so finally we rolled up in our sleeping bags together, the four of us, and slept in the woods. And then we hitchhiked back. And this was a pretty interesting ride. We were picked up in the back of a pickup truck, and the guy who was driving that pickup truck picked up every hitchhiker he saw, which is pretty cool. But so there was a whole bunch of us, tramps and hobos and drifters and a couple of odd missionaries in the back of the truck, and I got to hear the conversations, which was kind of fun. Someone talked about eating water buffalo and how tough it was. And we went through, going down the mountains, the entire range of weather. I think, we went from sun to snow to sleet to rain, and then down into the sun again. And don't forget, we were outside in a moving vehicle, but I enjoyed it. And so, my father did let me go on these road trips, but so they believed that God was going to judge America, the world eventually, but first America, the United States, because it was a sinful nation. And this is where they would kind of mix left wing, the popular new left rhetoric of the time with, right wing conservative evangelical rhetoric. It was all kind of mashed together. I know that Moses David, whose real name was David Berg, had been raised by an evangelical mother. He claimed that he came from 7 generations of Christian evangelists. And he also claimed that he was biologically, not religiously, but biologically Jewish, as of course was his mother. And later I realized, well, that doesn't really line up. So they believed that God would judge America, and this was 1976. So it was the bicentennial, and so Moses David had put in he put out what they call a Mo letter, which was a piece of, literature from Moses David, which I realized I didn't know that at first. They taught me to memorize a whole bunch of Bible verses, which generally I still remember. What I didn't realize at first was that the Bible and the writings of Moses David were equally considered to be infallible scripture. I remember thinking, when I was told that, I was like, this woman said, "Yeah, no, that's in scripture." And I said, "It is?" And she said, "Yeah, sure, it's right there," pointing to the Mo letter. And I'm like, huh. So he indicated that America was going to be judged by God, who, by the way, preferred the Soviet Union to the United States at that point, because of reasons. On July 4th, 1976, 200-year anniversary of the United States. Now, I was staying there the night of July 3rd, and we were all woken up in the middle of the night, and we were told, like, get dressed, and we weren't told anything. And I remember us repeating a Children of God line, which was, "Good revolutionaries don't ask questions." I was saying it as a joke, kind of, but they meant it seriously. And that's what I was going to say. So they taught us young folks to be rebellious against our families and against society and against America. But their perspective was actually highly authoritarian, very hierarchical, and unfortunately, their kids were not raised with any tolerance of rebellion. They were raised in a highly authoritarian way, and it was bad in many different ways, which came to include sexual abuse at some point. But that wasn't on the table yet. So what happened, it turned out, was that they took us all to a campsite on a lake, and we had fun camping out and swimming in the lake and drinking milk, which had vanilla extract and therefore a mild amount of alcohol. And it was just generally a fun time. But to our surprise, when we rode back to civilization, everything was the same. Not much had changed, except that the 4th of July was over. So now they start backpedaling, which apparently they had to do previously, when Moses David had predicted that God would be judging America at the time of I think it was the arrival of a comet. I hadn't belonged that then. But anyway, what they said was, "Oh, Moses David didn't say that America was going to be judged on July 4th. We said that. We misunderstood what he said. It's our fault." And I think the pamphlet had just enough ambiguity to give enough wiggle room for them to retroactively deny that had been the prophecy, once the prophecy proved to not come true. But they still believed that God would judge America, and pretty soon, and said there was this push to raise money and get everybody out of the USA. And so the girl that I had a crush on was headed for Argentina, and I asked, can I go to Argentina with her? And they were like, my father was like, no. And then later my mother and stepfather were like, no, nope, you can't, no. They later pointed out that at that point, Argentina was having its dirty wars, and it was rounding people up and killing them anonymously and so forth. So yeah, maybe it was just as well I didn't take that trip, as well as that it ended up physically distancing myself from the children of God, which was probably a good thing in the long run. His vision of what would happen after Jesus returned and the whole world had been judged and all that, and the end time utopia had been set up. Moses David would be king, and it would be, basically it would be a theocratic monarchy run under godly socialism. So that was their attempt to keep it sounding leftist, was the socialism part. And they, it would become very densely populated, I imagine, because nobody there would use birth control and all the women would be pregnant most of the time. And some of the details don't really add up all that well. Like, wouldn't the people who were born there behave like the people before had behaved? Because who knows? So far, it hasn't transpired. So we don't know yet. I moved back in. My mother and stepfather came back from India. I still had a huge resentment that they had not taken me to India as they had said they would, and instead had dumped me in this boring, boring town of Richmond, California. And then I moved back to the house in Sausalito with them and my brother. A couple more points about them. So when I had been in Hawaii and I had seen and heard them speaking in tongues, they explained to me, well, unlike other Christians or so-called Christians, we do not believe in water baptism by water, because John the Baptist said, I baptize with water, but there is one coming far greater than me who will baptize with fire and with the Holy Spirit. And so that's what we do. Obviously, the Gospels generally agree that the guy he was talking about was Jesus. So what did that mean? It meant that after I'd said the prayer to ask Jesus into my heart, I said another prayer that they guided me on, in which I asked the Holy Spirit to come into me and baptize me. And they told me that after that, I could speak in tongues too, if the Holy Spirit moved me. And of course it did, and I started speaking in tongues like the rest of them. So, so the Mo letters, as it turned out, the Mo letters that we gave away on the streets were, they were ironically G-rated. The Mo letters had letters on them, letter ratings, just like movies do. G meant general public. GF meant general public and friends. Some people were close friends, they were friends with the movement, but they had not made up their mind to join. And then there were pamphlet. I was allowed to read those two categories, but then there were another two categories. One was long-term members and leaders. Long-term meant 6 months or longer, which I didn't belong for 6 months. And leaders obviously meant leaders, which leaders only, LO, leaders only, and I never became a leader in their hierarchical structure either. So I was not supposed to be reading those two categories of Mo letters. But of course I did, and I kind of could see why they had been, concealed in that way. Of course, he talked about, they had some rather odd, even the G rated Mo letters were a bit odd in that, well, for example, and they like to call themselves revolutionary and their movement the Revolution, which really fit in well with that, mid-70s countercultural vibe. So he wrote one pamphlet called Revolutionary Women, which sounds feministic, but definitely was not. And he wrote another one called He wrote one called Mountain Men, which was metaphorically describing the men in the movement as scaling the mountains to new heights and such. And then he also wrote one called Mountain Women, which was basically about braless women and their breasts. That was really what it was about. And they also did a song called "Come On Ma, Burn Your Bra." It's kind of an urban myth. Apparently, at one point at a feminist demonstration, feminists burned some garments that they deemed to be offensive, and one of them was a bra. They threw a bra in. They deemed these like pantyhose, girdles, whatever. These were articles of clothing that were oppressive to women, and one was a bra. And so there was this myth from that feminists all over the place were burning bras, just like anti-war protesters were burning draft cards. And it wasn't really true, but nevertheless, they had a song that said, "Come on, Ma, burn your bra," which again sounded feminist, but it wasn't. It was again Moses David's thing for braless women. It was his fetishes. Most people don't call breast fetishes. They don't call attractions. This is a sideline. They don't call attractions to breast fetishism, but they call attraction to foot fetishism, and so forth. I wrote a whole article on, an essay on that sort of thing. Anyhow, but he certainly was a kinky, pervy, and not in a good or friendly, or mainly not in a fully consensual always way. And even when it was consensual, it was fairly coercive most of the time. And then he had also he had another pamphlet called Revolutionary Sex. And, a lot of it seemed pretty, not so off the hook. He said, it's okay for boys to masturbate as long as they don't do it all the time or stay up all night, at the expense of other things. Not bad advice. And he said, and lesbianism is okay. I don't have a problem, God doesn't he didn't say I, but essentially his being a prophet meant that everything that came out of his mouth was the same as if it had come out of God's mouth, and was thus infallible. And so when he meant, I don't have an issue, I don't have a problem with lesbians, what he actually said was, God doesn't have a problem with lesbians. Okay, good to know. But apparently God did have a problem, at least at that time, with gay men. That was not acceptable to God. I wrote something along those lines to my folks when they were still in India, and they got the letter, and my mom said, she read it and she was like, wait, lesbianism is okay. Why just lesbian? You know, she picked up that I didn't mention about gay men, and she picked up this disparity. So yeah, they were homophobic. And these were only the acceptable for the general public letters. The hidden ones were even weirder. Well, he talked about his mistress. So I don't know where I got the idea that he didn't believe in premarital sex, because that was not the case. Apparently, they had been at the very beginning of the movement, but I hadn't even been there then. And it had really never been the case in David Berg's personal life. He had really never been particularly monogamous or faithful to his wife. And then he picked up a mistress, Maria Zerby, whom he called Mama Maria. He wrote a book, he wrote a Mo letter, I think that was general public too, called Old Church, New Church. And he liked to use the phrase out of the Gospels, you cannot put new wine in old bottles because it will break them. Maybe it was sparkling and it would, old worn out leather couldn't hold it. I'm not sure. So, but anywho, he used the phrase, well, he liked to call older people, even though he was older, but particularly older people who were not in the children of God. And older pretty much meant, as they used to say, anybody over 30. And most of us weren't. We had a 35-year-old member, and he was considered kind of unusual, actually. But of course, Berg was a good deal older than that. But we never saw pictures of him. I mean, we never saw photos of him. We saw cartoonish drawings of him that were in all his letters, basically depicting him as a lion with a big beard. And I'm sure that was how he told them to draw them. And I think part of that was that he was hopping from country to country. And at least at some point, he was running from the law. He was avoiding being caught until he could get somewhere where he could really create a safe fortress for himself, which eventually turned out to be the Philippines. But at the time, he indicated that he was living in a town in a village in rural Europe. He was living without electricity or running water, indoor plumbing and that sort of thing. And who knows how much of that was true. Okay, sorry. Back to his pamphlet, Old Church, New Church. So he was talking about the old church. I mean, on one level, this could be interpreted as him saying older forms of Christianity were the old church, obviously, and newer forms, meaning us, was the new church, which was clearly superior, and the people in it were new bottles, and the people not in it, especially older people, were old bottles. So that was one possible interpretation, and the most obvious one. A second layer of interpretation was that he was talking about his wife of by then many years, and she was the old church. By the way, on the cover of the pamphlet, the old church was depicted. It said old church, a fairly unattractive older woman, and the one labeled young church was a beautiful young woman. And so or rather new church, the old church was his wife, and the new church was his mistress. And his wife was still a member of the group at that point. She even wrote, David Berg didn't write all the letters. His wife occasionally wrote one. One of his daughters sometimes wrote one. His wife wrote a couple of them that I know of, including one that said that their ministry should not be limited just to high schools, but also to junior high schools, which of course was how they got the girl, Elisha, and then me. And then there was a third really sinister interpretation of that letter that I did not read until much later. David Berg had Faithy, Hobie. Well, he had three daughters. The older one, but he was talking about Faith and Deborah were what they were called. And Deborah was older, and Faith was younger, and she was pretty from the picture I saw of her. There was one thing that seemed, if you were interpreting it, the text as referring to older and newer forms of Christianity, then there was one line that did seem puzzling, which was, and the whole thing was in bad fake King James English, which seemed like, how a prophet would receive his prophecies. It seemed reasonable to me, or at least some of the time. So he said that the older church had refused to partake with him in the marriage bed. Doesn't sound like we're really talking about churches at this point, are we? Or forms of Christianity. It does seem that his wife thought he was too carnal, which turned out to be definitely true, and did not have sex with him as much as he wanted. And his mistress, she pretty much was just as freaky as he was. So it was a better match. But his two daughters, it turned out that not only was he a pedophile and a sex addict and an alcoholic and a narcissist, but he also had a fetish for incest in and of itself. Even when he had access to plenty of other women and girls, he still was interested in his daughters and his granddaughter. And he said he believed that he could have had sex with his mother and was sorry he hadn't when he was, a boy, which was probably not true. But anyway, when his daughter arrived, so they had both probably been molested. Probably all three of his daughters had been, but Deborah had completely suppressed the memory. She flew to London, which was actually where her father was living. And so what they did was they went to a costume store and they got some costumes where he was dressed as a king and she was dressed as a queen, and they and some other cog people held a marriage of the king and queen. And she went along with it because she didn't really yet understand that he meant it literally. She thought it was some kind of metaphor, but it wasn't. And that night she realized that he very much did consider it a real marriage and wanted to consummate it. And she said no. And he didn't like that, but he did continue to tolerate her being in the movement. And his younger daughter, Faith, and she then flashed back to some things that had happened when she had been a child and sort of remembered them. His second daughter, Faith, most likely did go along with it. And so according to that interpretation, the old church was Deborah, who had refused to partake in the marriage bed. And the new church was his younger daughter, Faithy, who had not. So each level of interpretation gets more and more sinister. And we're still talking about the stuff that was available to the general public. But yes, in the stuff that wasn't, he was talking to his wife, his mistress, Maria, and it was pretty clear that in that one that she was his mistress. She was giving him wine. He said that he did like drinking wine, which was certainly true. And he also said that they can't stop us from taking over the world. They can't stop us, just like they can't stop the rain from falling. They could put up an umbrella, but they can't stop the rain from falling. That was his view, that we would just overwhelm the world and no one could stop us from taking over. In another pamphlet, he, despite claiming that he was biologically Jewish, which I doubt, he was very much an anti-Semite. There were Jewish members, but at least those Jews who, basically, if they weren't in the children of God, they were bad. And he particularly, he said, well, I used to think that because I was getting my salvation from both directions, because first of all, I was Jewish, which was God's chosen people. And secondly, I was a, born again Christian. So my salvation came from both directions at once. But in reality, if God discriminated, which he doesn't, Jews would actually have it be considered worse by God because they had crucified Jesus. Now, he acted, and I thought that this was a new idea, deicide, not realizing that it was basically millennia old. It wasn't until much later that I read a book called Constantine's Cross, which was about, you know, 2,000 years of Christian persecution of Jews, that I got why I finally really understood why my parents were so hostile to the idea of me becoming a Christian. It finally, basically all three of them, but especially my mother and stepfather, I didn't really click. So then and then it was either in the same pamphlet or a different pamphlet, perhaps a different one, where he said that Jews had created a two-armed monster. One arm was capitalism and the other was communism. And this two-armed monster, which they had created, would destroy them. I didn't realize that aside from the part where their own monster would destroy them, I guess that he may have made up on himself. But the rest of it was totally Nazi propaganda. Yeah, that's what it was. I didn't know it. Huh. And then as far as, one might wonder, and this has come up in other schools of born again Christianity, if as soon as you've asked Jesus to enter your heart and take over your life and to forgive you of all your sins, and he would, and you wouldn't go to hell, then what was the point of any further motivation to do anything you didn't want to do? Like, why not just have fun after that, because we don't have to worry about the fear of hell. And he said, yeah, but when you get to heaven, if you're a person who has not served God, specifically among us, then you will go to heaven, but you will not get a crown. And if you have, you will get a crown. And apparently, even though he was the king, and I guess Maria would be the queen, nevertheless, everybody else getting a crown was a big deal and reason to, give your life selflessly. And also, using the no true Scotsman fallacy, he said, if you weren't, joining up with us and putting your Christianity to the fullest and living collectively as they did in the book of Acts, which they sort of did. They did. They lived collectively and pooled their money. Each group, since they were widely decentralized, although hierarchical, they did that. Although, of course, it turned out that Berg was skimming quite a bit off the top, enough to build himself a private little compound / village in the Philippines later. But the crown was a big deal, so there's a reason I'm getting to that. Anywho, I went back to Sausalito, and my parents did not dig this at all. Nothing. They did not like anything about the children of God. They were not as tolerant as my father was. They did not want it in socks or in a box or on a raft or on a spacecraft or anything. And they'd given my brother 50 cents, and I finally convinced him to give it to me so that he could have a crown in heaven after I'd had him say the prayer. And my parents told me, obviously then he told them, and my parents said I was a con man. In reality, actually, I really did think that him giving his money just as every new member of the children of God had to, donate all their money to the group, and then start hustling more money for the group every day, or not every day, but most days. And so I thought that if he gave me the 50 cents, he would get to get a crown in heaven. But my folks didn't buy that, and I can see why. Now, out of all this ambiguity and mixed messages that they gave about sex, I couldn't really make heads or tails of it. So I basically defaulted to the standard Christian idea that you should not have premarital sex if you're a real Christian. He also said that he liked Catholics better than Protestants, and he liked Muslims, and he especially liked Muammar Gaddafi, and he wrote a bunch of Mo letters about Gaddafi, and then eventually visited him and wrote this whole glowing account of how Gaddafi had treated him like a king, and it had just been such a great time. Later, I read that what really happened was he went to Libya. Gaddafi put him and the rest of them under house arrest. He had tried to do his normal thing of sending his women to seduce him. And some of his generals were into it, but he was a real serious Muslim and he was not into it. So he basically put them under house arrest under comfortable conditions, but that Dave Berg realized that he was in over his head, and Gaddafi could just snuff him like a bug if he wanted to. And so he left as soon as he could. And Gaddafi later said, "This old man is going around the world pretending to be a king and a prophet." Which, whatever else you think about Muammar Gaddafi, that was pretty accurate. Okay. So now I'm not allowed to go to a foreign country to escape God's judgment of America. And my mother and stepfather, who had had just about enough of me and were doing anything, just really wanted to get rid of me for a while again. Well, remember that guy I talked about, an old friend of the family's who used to be a mailman in San Francisco and was a cool guy until he became a follower of Stephen Gaskin, and then became an uptight jerk. So they were still in touch with him, and apparently the place, the commune that Stephen had set up was in eastern Tennessee. It was a pretty large chunk of land with a pretty large scene of about, I don't know, maybe 1,100 people at the time. And there they were doing these various projects to convince themselves that they were great, which they weren't. They may have done some good stuff, but the latest project was to take troubled teens, teens who weren't getting along with their families, and at least in one case was straight out of juvenile hall, let them go to the farm, and then they had no real plan for them, and it didn't work out as planned at all. And most of them who hadn't been raised there wound up getting kicked off within a few months, including myself. But we'll get to that later. They suggested I go there And so I went to the Children of God leaders and I said, this is the deal. I can't leave the country. But I have this chance to go to this commune, and it's out in the middle of the woods. Should I do it? And the guys I talked to said, yes, we think you should, because you'll be safer in the country when God judges America, then you would be, closer to an urban area. And he said, a couple of them said, one of them said, it's a hippie commune, and it's a really dead hippie commune, meaning it didn't have the original hippie spirit. And on that point, I came to very much agree with them. So I loaded up my trunks. I loaded up my bags and I moved to Tennessee. I took a Greyhound to Nashville, still identifying as a member of the Children of God. The truth is, as a side note, even in when I was in Richmond, and I was showing up after school every day. And if I could get out of school early by saying I had a headache, which, by the way, I really did. I had a lot of tension headaches back then I would go there even earlier, and my headache would go away. So, but one of them sat me down and said, now look, Genesis, that was the name I had taken. At first I had taken Genesis Locust, and eventually they said, that's a terrible idea. You might as well call yourself Genesis Flea or Genesis Louse or something. And when I told that to my father, he said, I'm inclined to agree. And so I changed my name to Genesis Waters. And that was the name I went by while I was with them. So anyway, he said, Genesis, you give every one of us faith by coming here every day. But would you mind not coming here so often for a while? I think they were realizing, they had this drive to recruit, kids from junior high, but they didn't actually know very much what to do with them either. I'm not that useful, couldn't raise very much money. Talked a lot, wanted attention, had my own thing going, even if I was trying to conform to theirs. So anyways, bottom of the line is that I took the Greyhound to towards Nashville, and that seems like a good way to end this video, which is now more than an hour and a half long. So adios until next time.